People who are pretty sure they've encountered a serial killer. What happened? I had an employee that worked for me doing minor maintenance repairs on construction equipment. One day it just took him way too long on a job and I was pissed. I pulled the GPS info and he was nowhere near where he was supposed to be. My admin and I both called him repeatedly with no response. Now I'm even more pissed because this wasn't the first time he took too long / didn't answer his company provided Nextel radio. We start digging. Find out it has happened repeatedly. He gets back late and I waited for him, alone, in my office. I terminated him and he took it surprisingly well. Surprised me because I dealt with a ton of BS as a woman working in a male-dominated field and company. Few years later, I'm working in a different location for the same company and some cops show up and want to know what I remember about him. I tell them I fired him, etc. They subpoena the GPS records from the company. Then they started finding the rest of the bodies. He pled down and pled guilty to avoid the death penalty. He was picking up prostitutes in the company work truck, killing them and dumping bodies in a rural part of the neighboring county. Robert Lee Yates was an Army pilot flying OH-58s while I was flying UH-1s, same battalion but different company, at Fort Drum, New York. They would send us down to fly helicopter simulators once a year in Pennsylvania to maintain our instrument ratings. We would carpool in one vehicle. Bob had a van with shag carpet in the back so he would drive about 5 of us during those trips. It was about a 4-hour drive so we joke and tell stories to pass the time. I was a fairly new pilot who enjoyed hearing the veteran pilots tell war stories. Bob was a CW3 at that time and was a bit odd but nothing alarming. 18 years later we see him on TV being charged with multiple killings of prostitutes across several states. He had used a Corvette and a van for the killings. Yes, that same van. I was once sat in my car at the back of a country lane car park eating pizza in the dark with a friend, no street lights and just woods surrounding. Finished up and turned on the headlights and all we could see was a man-army crawling towards the car, was a few meters away. I have never turned the ignition so fast and sped off in my life. To make it scarier the guy just slowly got up and looked at us, didn't try to chase or grab the car or anything. My grandmother had 3 husbands die of food poisoning, accidentally. I don't believe it for a second. My grandmother swears she met David Parker Ray, aka the Toy Box Killer. My grandfather was stationed in Fort Bliss so she took her 3 daughters camping in Elephant Butte State Park, the same place where he was a ranger. She said a ranger kept trying to get them to stay in his trailer instead of camping by the lake. Obviously they refused and went on a hike, but when they came back their campsite was trashed so she packed them all up and drove home in the dark. When I got into true crime and was telling her how close he was to us she relayed the story, and when I showed her a photo she said that it was definitely him just aged a bit. Not his usual MO but this would have been in the mid-70s and no one's exactly sure how long he killed for. My grandmother swears she met David Parker Ray, aka the Toy Box Killer. My grandfather was stationed in Fort Bliss so she took her 3 daughters camping in Elephant Butte State Park, the same place where he was a ranger. She said a ranger kept trying to get them to stay in his trailer instead of camping by the lake. Obviously they refused and went on a hike, but when they came back their campsite was trashed so she packed them all up and drove home in the dark. When I got into true crime and was telling her how close he was to us she relayed the story, and when I showed her a photo she said that it was definitely him just aged a bit. Not his usual MO but this would have been in the mid-70s and no one's exactly sure how long he killed for. *edited changed National Park to State Park. We were having a family barbecue at my cousin's farm in the late 70s/early 80s, when my 12-year-old cousin decided to ride his bike to the store. Just after leaving, a van pulled over to him and the driver tried talking him into the vehicle. When that didn't work, the man got out and tried to force him into the van. My cousin kicked and screamed and refused in every way possible to get away. A passing car saw what was happening and stopped, which probably spooked the van driver. The guy got back into his van and drove away immediately. My uncle, who was a member of the RCMP, had heard the commotion, had jumped into his car and drove to see what was going on. He managed to catch up to the van and arrested the guy for attempted kidnapping. Unfortunately, the charge didn't stick and the guy was eventually let go. The man's name was Clifford Robert Olson. We're pretty sure that my cousin might have been one of Olson's first attempts. Not me, but my uncle, his manager at the fast food place where he worked in high school, invited him and another kid over to his place after work. My uncle and his friend declined, and were very glad they did years later when it became public what exactly his former manager, John Wayne Gacy, was doing to and with those kids he invited over. My uncle accepted a ride from Gacy. He wasn't supposed to be hitchhiking but it was the 70s. At some point he got a bad vibe and jumped out at a red light. When Gacy was arrested he put 2 and 2 together. Since this got some traction, here's the full story. Uncle was 16 and decided to hitchhike home. Dude pulls over and he gets in. Immediately, the guy locks the car. As they're going along, this guy starts getting pretty creepy, saying things like we could go to the airport and I'll fly you anywhere you want. My uncle is very freaked out at this point and waits for his moment. He pulls the lock and jumps out at a light, and takes off running. He says the guy started following him, but by going through alleys and stuff he was able to shake him off. After he gets home, my grandma could tell something was wrong, so she asked him what happened. He admitted to hitchhiking and told grandma what the dude had done/said. Grandma got a baseball bat and they drove around town looking for the guy, but didn't find him. It was not too much later that they arrested him and the story broke. My mom rode her bike over and watched them take the bodies out from down the block, or so she says. As a youngster, my parents told me the time my father met Ted Bundy. He was walking into my mom's workplace as Bundy was walking out. They exchanged pleasantries and Bundy shook my father's hand. Bundy said he was working for a farmer in a town about 20 miles away. It struck my father odd because Bundy was wearing a long wool coat and his hands were baby soft smooth, not the hands or attire of a farm hand. There were announcements in the 70s warning residents that he may be in the area. We live very close to Colorado. It was an interesting story. When I was nearly 40, I was at a birthday party for a friend and afterward went to her house for some homemade food. She was telling me of when she was a criminal justice student in college and wrote her thesis on Ted Bundy. She said some of her material came from the police reports from when Bundy attacked my mom, which took me by surprise. I decided to talk to my parents about it. My mom worked at a Montgomery Wards in those days and was working there alone that day. Bundy came in and pulled her to a back room and dragged her to the ground. She said she started kicking and hitting him as hard as she could, fighting for her life. After a while, he got up, pointed at her, and said he was going to go get lunch and then come back for her and then left. It was around this time that he passed my dad coming in as Bundy was leaving. My mom looked like she could have been a sister to many of his victims. My father drove around with the local sheriff looking for him at several restaurants to no avail. Today my father can't stand watching documentaries of Bundy as he is often shown in that same wool coat and same smug smile. My parents protected us kids from feeling like evil could be that close. Whilst I was at university, I worked at a cafe in a local shopping center. One of our regular customers was a mum and son who would come have breakfast most mornings. The mum was delightful, however the son always seemed a bit off. Nothing major, just you'd say, "Have a great day," and he'd reply with, "Yes." Anyway, one day he comes in without his mum and has breakfast. The next day his face is all over the news as he had just been arrested for murdering his mum. Edit, just to address some of the comments, the son was of adult age and reportedly suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. Mum was his carer. He wasn't one when I met him. Worked a retail job that sold iPhones at a high-end mall. Guy comes in carrying a Nordstrom bag, wearing Gucci sunglasses and asks to buy an iPhone. While I waited for our BOH team to bring the iPhone, I'm making casual conversation with the guy. I ask what he does for work, says he's an actor. I ask if he's been in anything I might have seen, he says The Hunger Games. I say cool, who did you play? He mumbles something about being one of the tributes. Conversation somehow leads to him asking if I'm single. I told him I was engaged and he was visibly annoyed. His attitude was very arrogant, and he did a lot of uncomfortable/creepy staring that I noticed after he took off his sunglasses. I had initially asked him if he was eligible for an upgrade on his phone. He was confident that he was. Well, after checking his ID, standard protocol, and pulling up the account, nope, not eligible. But his brother's phone was eligible. He insists that he can use his brother's upgrade, but I tell him that stuff like this needs to be approved by the main account holder/authorized users. So he calls his stepmom and asks to use the brother's upgrade. His stepmom says no, and the guy throws a complete tantrum, saying that his brother is too young for an iPhone anyway, that he's fine using an older model, that he needs a new phone. Stepmom doesn't budge, yet I'm stuck there for at least 20 minutes while this guy yells at his stepmom trying desperately to get his way. He leaves in a huff and I'm so relieved to get away from this entitled prick. The guy was Elliot Roger. I was in jail in Summit County in Ohio for being an idiot, basically, and came across the man that would be known as the Craigslist killer. The guy held Bible studies every night, was super preachy, and was very persuasive with people. He was in jail for a parole violation, running a prostitution mainly IIRC, from a robbery case in Texas and was waiting to see if he would be extradited to Texas. Somehow Summit County messed up and released him even though Texas sent them the paperwork saying they wanted him. He and the kid he had been partnering with had already killed multiple people, and when he was released they failed to kill another person and were caught. Saw his face in the paper about a month later and was like holy shite, I was in jail with that guy LMAO. My mom once told us about a suspected run-in she had with Clifford Olson. She was around 13 years old walking home from swim club and a man matching his description pulled up alongside her and tried to strike up a conversation. He would ask her where the post office was located and said he needed some help mailing a present. My mom was smart enough to realize it was Labor Day and the post office was closed. She saw he had plates on his car from the US and had leather gloves on. When she finally worked up the courage to end the conversation and walk away, the man started swearing at her, telling her to get in the car, and then he sped off. The dates and location all add up too. Freaky shit. Edit. I didn't expect this to blow up, lol. I asked my mom for more information, but she pretty much told me the same story. She ran off the sidewalk into the park across the street to get away from him and didn't stop till she got home. She never reported it to the police but told my grandparents about the encounter. She wasn't allowed to walk home from swim club anymore, and the parents set up carpooling programs for the group. Clifford Olson, the Beast of British Columbia, was finally arrested in 1981 on Vancouver Island on suspicion of trying to abduct 2 teenage girls. He committed 11 known murders of children and teenagers in a little over a year, with countless assaults before and during his spree. They found the decomposing body of a 13-year-old girl a few weeks after this encounter within an hour of my mother's house. The body was later linked to Olson. It gives serial killer but definitely trafficker or child predator. Some background. My stepdad was a truck driver, so often we would visit him at a local truck stop when he was near to grab breakfast, etc. My mother is not great. During one of these adventures my mom decided she wanted us to stay with stepdad in the truck. Sister was 11, I was 9. During this 2-week period. Lol. We were in a random truck stop in the Georgia. My sister and I went to go take a shower, because we hadn't for days, and shared a shower to save on money. I was in and out and waited in the hallways for my sister. A man came up to me and started asking questions. This happened in the early 2000s, so I had been taught stranger danger, but also was still being taught always be respectful to adults bullshit. I was giving him basic answers. But then he pushed, showing me his truck. My tiny self was terrified, but I kept saying no, I can't. Eventually he got annoyed and just grabbed my arm and started pulling. In that moment my sister came out and snatched my ass back and we ran. Crying, telling my mom. I'm called overdramatic. If my sister didn't see me, I'm positive I would have never been seen again. Traveling out of state for a vacation with my kids, at a gas station this man starts trying to talk to my young daughter. I immediately got between them, but not before my daughter blurted out exactly where we were going and how long we would be there. I suddenly felt sick. Something about the guy scared me. I just knew there was going to be a problem. I hustled the kids back to the car and waited to drive away out of fear he might follow us. I didn't see him come out, so eventually I drove off, but I was paranoid about it afterward. 2 days later I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone banging aggressively on our door. He was screaming that he was with security for the complex and that there was an intruder seen in the area, so I was required by law to open the door. Obviously I didn't fall for that. He started swearing and threatening me. Suddenly he just stopped. Suddenly something spooked him and he turned and bolted. He had been standing kind of off to the side and reaching over to bang on the door in a way I couldn't see his face. When he moved, I saw it. It was the guy from the gas station. He followed us through 2 states. The actual security for the complex drove around but never found him. There was a broken gate next to the condo that they said he got in through.